The morning sun peeked over the skyline, casting a warm glow on the city Robert called home. He wiped the sleep from his eyes and adjusted the small cart filled with handmade wooden toys that represented not just his livelihood, but years of dedication. The streets buzzed with life. Shopkeepers opened their doors, street vendors called out their goods, and commuters rushed past, eyes fixed on their phones. Robert's hands, rough and worn from years of work, moved skillfully over the toys, arranging them with care. Each piece was more than just wood. It was a symbol of the resilience that defined him and the hope that kept him going after his wife's passing. His gaze shifted to the distant school building where his son, Ethan, studied, the only source of light in his otherwise hard life. As Robert pushed his cart down the street, a familiar voice called out, "Morning, Robert." It was Mrs. Green from the bakery next door, her warm smile a small comfort in his daily routine. "Morning, Mrs. Green," he replied, tipping his worn cap. The day was just beginning, and he could already feel the weight of it settling on his shoulders. But in the heart of the city, amidst the noise and haste, Robert carried a quiet resolve. Graduation day was coming, and he would be there, no matter what. Ethan sat at his desk in the back of the classroom, the dull hum of conversation around him forming a constant background noise. The school was an architectural marvel with wide hallways, polished marble floors, and large windows that let the sunlight pour in. But despite its grandeur, the place felt cold, a reminder of how different he was from those who filled its halls. He glanced at the other students, their laughter carefree and confident. Brandon and Tyler stood at the center of a group, their easy smiles and polished appearance a stark contrast to Ethan's simple uniform and worn backpack. They were popular, privileged, and unbothered by the worries that occupied Ethan's mind. The whispers, the sideways glances, and the muffled laughter as he passed by had become routine, a part of the daily challenge he faced. The bell rang, and the teacher entered, silencing the room. Mr. Sanders, an older man with gray hair and a stern demeanor, began to teach, his voice measured and calm. Ethan focused intently, taking notes as if the pages in front of him were a lifeline. He knew he had to do more than just attend this school, he had to excel. Each grade, each exam was a step toward a future he dreamed of, a future where Robert's sacrifices were rewarded, where their struggles became stories of triumph. Brandon's mocking voice interrupted his focus, just a whisper loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Hey, Ethan, studying hard? You know you need it more than we do." Tyler's laughter followed, and Ethan felt the familiar rush of heat to his face. He didn't react. Reacting would only encourage them, and he had promised himself long ago that he wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Lunch was no different. Ethan sat alone at a table near the window, a book open in front of him. The cafeteria was filled with the sounds of chatter and clattering trays. He caught glimpses of his classmates in their branded clothes, effortlessly blending into a world that felt just out of reach for him. But as he flipped a page, he found solace in the words, an escape into a world where struggle and victory were intertwined. After school, Ethan waited at the gate, watching the stream of cars as students climbed into back seats without a second thought. He knew his father would be working late, so he'd take the bus home. The ride was long and noisy, the city passing by in a blur of neon signs and bustling sidewalks. He used the time to study, determined to hold on to the promise of a better future. When he got home, the apartment was filled with the scent of wood shavings and varnish, a testament to Robert's work. The living room doubled as a workshop, wooden toys in various stages of completion spread across the table. Ethan put his bag down and called out, "Dad, I'm home." Robert appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a rag. His face lit up with a smile, the fatigue momentarily erased. "Hey, champ, how was school?" "Good," Ethan replied, forcing a smile. He never told his father about the ridicule or the isolation. Why burden him with that? Robert had enough on his plate. The two shared a brief silence, filled with an unspoken understanding. It was the kind of silence that spoke of love, sacrifice, and an unyielding resolve to move forward. "Graduation's coming up soon," Robert said, his voice carrying a note of pride. I can't wait to see you on that stage." Ethan nodded, a mix of excitement and anxiety twisting in his chest. "Yeah, me too, Dad." But in his mind he wondered what the day would bring. Would it be a celebration of all they had endured, or would it be overshadowed by the cruelty that seemed to follow him? The days leading up to graduation were filled with anticipation. Robert worked late into the night, the rhythmic tapping of his tools filling the small apartment as he carved toys to sell the next day. He saved every dollar he could, tucking away bills into an envelope marked graduation. Ethan watched his father's dedication with a mix of admiration and guilt. He knew that the new suit Robert planned to buy wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was a symbol of pride, a way for his father to stand tall among the parents of Ethan's classmates. And although Ethan tried not to think about it, the worry about Brandon and Tyler's taunts lingered in the back of his mind. One night, as Robert put the finishing touches on a wooden train, he looked up at Ethan, who was reviewing notes at the kitchen table. "You know, your mom would be so proud of you," Robert said, his voice soft, tinged with memory. "You've come so far." Ethan met his father's eyes, the weight of his words settling in his chest. "I hope so, Dad." Robert stood up, walking over to place a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "I know so." The moment was brief, but it carried the warmth of a lifetime of shared struggle and dreams. It was in these small moments that Ethan found his strength, a reminder that whatever challenges came, he wasn't facing them alone. Ethan returned to his notes, but his mind wandered to graduation day. Would it be the moment he and Robert had waited for, or would it become a day marked by humiliation and pain? The question lingered, casting a shadow over his anticipation. The days rolled forward with an air of excitement as graduation loomed on the horizon. For most of the students, it was a time of celebration and anticipation. Brandon and Tyler, however, viewed it differently. To them, it was a stage, a final opportunity to remind everyone of their superiority and make Ethan the center of their jokes one last time. Brandon lounged in the luxurious family room of his home, a space adorned with fine art and glass sculptures. Tyler was sprawled across the opposite sofa, a mischievous grin on his face. The two were discussing the graduation ceremony, their voices dripping with entitlement. "You know, graduation isn't just about walking up there and taking a diploma," Brandon said, his voice smooth with a touch of arrogance. "It's about making a statement." Tyler smirked. "And what better statement than reminding Ethan he'll never really belong with us?" He sat up, eyes glinting with an idea. "I have just the thing." The two leaned in conspiratorially, their laughter echoing through the room. They planned meticulously, crafting a way to ruin the moment that meant everything to Ethan, and by extension, Robert. While Brandon and Tyler plotted, Robert was putting the final touches on his preparations. He had managed to save enough to buy a simple but new suit, one that made him stand a little straighter when he tried it on. He gazed at himself in the cracked mirror, the suit hanging on his wiry frame but feeling like armor. It wasn't much, but it was the best he could offer on this important day. Ethan watched from the doorway, his heart swelling with gratitude. The scene was both endearing and painful, a reminder of how much his father had sacrificed to reach this moment. "It looks good, Dad," he said, voice low with emotion. Robert turned, a shy smile breaking across his face. "Think so? I just want to make sure I don't embarrass you." "Never," Ethan whispered. The word held layers of unspoken truth, the promise that whatever came, they would face it together. As Robert hung the suit carefully on the closet door, neither he nor Ethan could have imagined how that piece of fabric would become a symbol of resilience in the hours to come. The morning of graduation dawned with the golden light of early summer, casting a warm glow over the city. Robert rose before the sun, the anticipation making sleep impossible. He checked his suit for any wrinkles, polished his shoes, and left the apartment with a mix of pride and nervousness. The streets were quieter than usual, as if the city itself was holding its breath for the events to come. Ethan, meanwhile, stood in his room, staring at the speech he had written. He felt a blend of hope and apprehension swirling inside him. He knew today would be a defining moment, not just for him, but for his father who would be sitting in the audience, watching with eyes full of love and hard-earned pride. By mid-morning, parents and students began filling the grand hall where the ceremony was to be held. The space was adorned with banners, chairs lined up in perfect rows, and the air filled with murmurs of excitement. Brandon and Tyler arrived, their polished shoes clicking against the marble floor as they shared a sly nod. Their plan was set in motion. Robert arrived moments later, straightening his suit jacket and taking a deep breath as he stepped into the hall. The buzz of excitement was almost overwhelming, but he pushed through it, finding a seat near the back. He wanted to watch Ethan from a distance, to give him the space to shine on his own. As he settled into his seat, a sudden hush fell over the room. Brandon and Tyler had made their move, appearing from behind with sneers on their faces. Tyler nudged Brandon and whispered, "Now." Before Robert could react, Brandon accidentally bumped into him, causing him to stumble. In that instant, a cup of water splashed onto his suit, soaking the fabric and leaving dark stains down his chest. Gasps erupted from a few onlookers, but most turned away, choosing not to intervene. Robert's face flushed with embarrassment as he looked down at the suit that he had worked so hard to buy. The sting of humiliation spread through him, but he caught sight of the stage where Ethan would soon be standing, and he knew he couldn't leave. He clenched his jaw, lifted his chin, and settled back into his seat, refusing to let shame take him away from his son's moment. From his position on stage, Ethan scanned the crowd, his eyes catching on a familiar figure in the back, his father, wetsuit and all. A chill ran down his spine as he realized what had just happened. His carefully prepared speech fluttered in his hand, suddenly meaningless. Ethan's eyes locked onto his father's figure, a stark image of resilience and quiet pain. Robert sat in the back row, soaked suit glistening under the stage lights, eyes cast downward yet refusing to leave. Ethan's heart clenched with a mix of anger, sorrow, and determination. The whispers in the hall, the subtle glances, and the indifference of the onlookers fueled a fire inside him. The speech he'd spent weeks perfecting felt hollow, insignificant in the face of what had just happened. He took a deep breath, steadying his shaking hands as he stepped up to the microphone. The room fell into an anticipatory silence, the audience expecting the usual thank yous and reflections. But instead of reading the neat, practiced words on the paper, Ethan folded it and set it aside. His voice, when it came, carried the weight of years of silence. "Today, I was going to tell you all about the importance of hard work and perseverance," he began, scanning the room, "but something more important has come to light." A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Brandon and Tyler, seated near the front, exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier smirks fading. Ethan took a deep breath, eyes finding Robert's again. "I want to tell you about someone who embodies strength more than anyone I know. Someone who has given everything so that I could stand here today." He paused, his voice catching as he continued. "My father, Robert, has worked harder than anyone in this room could ever imagine. He's faced loss, hardship, and the kind of daily struggle most of you have never had to think about. And even today, on what should be a proud moment, he faced humiliation." Gasps echoed throughout the hall. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing down on everyone like a heavy blanket. Ethan's gaze shifted to Brandon and Tyler, unflinching. "There are people here who think that status or wealth gives them the right to look down on others, to mock them, to break them. But what they don't understand is that true strength comes not from privilege, but from sacrifice, resilience, and love." Brandon and Tyler's faces paled, the reality of Ethan's words cutting deeper than they expected. The eyes of parents and students shifted to them, expressions shifting from curiosity to judgment. Ethan's voice grew firmer, resonating through the hall. "My father is the reason I am here, the reason I push through every day, despite the mockery and the judgment. He deserves more respect than anyone in this room, and I refuse to let this moment pass without honoring him." Ethan took a step forward, gripping the edges of the podium. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in with the weight of his confession. The crowd's murmurs ceased as his voice rose, strong and unwavering. My father spent his life making sure I never felt the weight of what we lacked. He works from sunrise to sunset, crafting wooden toys with hands calloused from years of labor so that I could come to this school and chase a dream. Today, someone thought they could take away his dignity with a cruel prank. But they're wrong. My father's worth is not defined by a suit, a job, or the opinions of others. It's defined by his heart and his sacrifices. The principal, Mr. Jacobs, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Teachers exchanged glances, some with tears in their eyes, while others sat stiffly, unsure of how to process the unexpected speech. Ethan looked straight at Brandon and Tyler, whose eyes were now fixed on the floor. To those who think that belittling others makes them powerful, know this. True power lies in lifting others up, not tearing them down. And today, I stand here proud of my father, not ashamed. The hall erupted into applause, hesitant at first, then building into a wave that swept across the room. Parents rose from their seats, teachers nodded with approval, and students exchanged shocked looks. The principal's gavel hit the podium, trying to restore order, but the momentum of Ethan's words could not be halted. Ethan stepped back from the podium, his heart pounding as he locked eyes with his father. Robert's expression was no longer one of embarrassment, but of overwhelming pride. In that moment, both knew that the day's events had changed more than just their own lives. It had set a precedent for courage and dignity that would be remembered long after the ceremony was over. The ceremony ended with an air of solemnity. Parents filed out, some still murmuring about the unexpected turn of events, while others patted Ethan on the back, offering words of support. Brandon and Tyler, who had tried to slip out unnoticed, were stopped by Mr. Jacobs and ushered into the principal's office for a private conversation that promised consequences. Ethan walked toward the back of the hall where Robert stood, his suit still damp but forgotten. The father and son shared a long embrace, one that spoke of understanding, pride, and a bond that no amount of mockery could break. "You did it, son," Robert whispered, his voice cracking. "No, Dad," Ethan said, stepping back with a small, tired smile. "We did it." Outside, a crowd gathered, parents exchanging looks of admiration as Robert and Ethan emerged. But among them, Brandon's father stood with a hardened face, his eyes narrowing at his son's actions and the shame they had brought. The story was far from over. What lay ahead would test remorse, redemption, and forgiveness. The weight of the day settled in as Ethan and Robert made their way home. The applause and murmurs of support echoed in their minds, but so did the glances of judgment and whispers of surprise. They walked side by side in silence, the city's neon lights flickering like stars in the puddles at their feet. The once heavy burden of shame had been lifted, replaced by something unexpected, a sense of vindication. Back at the school, the consequences for Brandon and Tyler were unfolding rapidly. The principal, Mr. Jacobs, a stern figure known for upholding the school's pristine reputation, leaned back in his chair and regarded the two boys with an icy stare. "Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" His voice was low, measured, but filled with disappointment. Brandon and Tyler shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The bravado that usually accompanied their every move had evaporated, replaced by the reality of their actions. Brandon's father, Mr. Caldwell, stood by the window, arms crossed tightly over his chest, eyes blazing with a mix of anger and shame. He spoke before Brandon could respond. "This is not just about tarnishing the school's reputation or even ours as a family. This is about the character you've shown, or lack thereof." Tyler's parents exchanged glances, their expressions a blend of embarrassment and disbelief. The silence that followed was suffocating, and for the first time, Brandon and Tyler felt the sting of consequences they couldn't laugh off or ignore. News of Ethan's speech spread quickly, not just through the school but throughout the community. Parents spoke about it at dinner tables, and teachers reflected on the incident during meetings. The story of a young man standing up for his father against the prejudices of the privileged resonated deeply. It was a wake-up call that forced many to reconsider their own actions and the environment they had helped cultivate. Robert's cafe, where he spent his evenings carving toys and serving regulars, saw a surge of visitors. People came not just to buy his toys, but to meet the man whose quiet resilience had inspired such a powerful moment. Neighbors who had once passed by without a second glance now offered words of respect and admiration. Ethan found himself in the middle of a whirlwind of attention. Fellow students who had never spoken to him approached with cautious smiles, some apologizing for not standing up for him sooner. Even Mr. Jacobs called him to his office to commend his courage, adding, "You've taught us all a lesson we won't soon forget." But amidst the newfound attention, Brandon and Tyler faced a different reality. The shame of being called out in front of their peers, coupled with the disapproval of their parents, weighed heavily. The school administration decided they would be suspended for the remainder of the school year and required to complete volunteer hours at local shelters to learn humility and empathy. As Brandon and Tyler walked through the halls for the last time that year, they felt the eyes of their classmates on them, not with admiration, but with judgment and pity. For once, they weren't at the top of the social ladder. They were the cautionary tale. Robert sat at the cafe, the quiet hum of evening settling in. He looked around at the place that had become more than a source of income. It was a testament to his journey. The front bell chimed and Ethan walked in, the exhaustion of the past few days evident in his eyes. "Busy day?" Robert asked, a soft smile breaking across his face. Ethan nodded, slumping into the chair across from his father. "Yeah, I didn't expect things to change so quickly." Robert reached over, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Sometimes, speaking the truth has a way of shaking things up." Ethan met his father's gaze and saw the pride there, the unspoken acknowledgement that they had faced something insurmountable and come out stronger. The moment was brief, but it fortified them both. Just as they were about to close for the night, the door creaked open, and in walked two familiar figures, Brandon and Tyler. Their heads were bowed, their postures no longer cocky but contrite. Ethan and Robert exchanged looks, the tension in the air thick as the realization hit. The past was not quite done with them. The months of suspension were unlike anything Brandon and Tyler had experienced. Volunteering at shelters forced them to see life from a different perspective. Gone were the luxury cars and fancy clothes. In their place were simple tasks, serving meals, cleaning, and listening to the stories of those who struggled daily. It was in these moments that they began to see their own privilege for what it was, an unearned advantage they had taken for granted. One day, as Brandon handed a meal to an elderly man who thanked him with a weathered smile, something shifted inside him. The realization that he had used his position to belittle others weighed heavily, and the guilt that followed was relentless. Tyler, who had always followed Brandon's lead, found himself grappling with the same thoughts. The anger and bitterness they had harbored for years now felt empty, replaced by a new understanding of what respect and dignity truly meant. It was after one such day at the shelter that Tyler looked at Brandon and said, "We need to make this right. Even if they don't forgive us, we need to try." The knock at the cafe door was hesitant. Robert, wiping his hands on a towel, looked up and saw the two figures standing outside. He glanced at Ethan, whose face was unreadable, before walking over to open the door. Brandon and Tyler stepped inside, the smell of varnish and baked goods filling the air. They stood awkwardly, eyes darting around the room before Brandon spoke, his voice low and shaky. "We're here to apologize." Robert nodded, motioning for them to sit. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, before Ethan finally broke it. "Why now?" Tyler swallowed hard, meeting Ethan's eyes for the first time without a trace of mockery. "Because we've learned that what we did was more than just a joke. It was wrong, and we hurt you and your dad. We're sorry." Robert and Ethan exchanged a look. The apology was unexpected, and forgiveness wasn't easy, but the sincerity in their voices hinted at change. Whether they would accept it was a decision that would change all their lives. The air in the cafe was thick with anticipation as Brandon and Tyler sat across from Robert and Ethan. The clock on the wall ticked, filling the silence with its steady rhythm. Brandon's fingers fidgeted, tapping against his leg as he waited for a response. Tyler's gaze was downcast, the weight of regret etched across his face. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the pressure of the moment pressing down on his chest. Forgiveness was not something he had anticipated offering so soon, if ever. Memories of the mocking laughter, the cruel jokes, and the humiliation they had inflicted on him resurfaced like fresh wounds. But as he looked at the two boys who had once been his tormentors, he saw something different, an unfamiliar vulnerability that mirrored his own struggles. Robert, who had watched the entire exchange silently, cleared his throat. His voice, when he spoke, was steady but kind. "You say you're sorry, and I believe that. But it's not up to me alone. The pain you caused my son goes deeper than you know." Brandon nodded, his eyes finally meeting Robert's. "We know we can't change what we did, but we're here to make amends, whatever that looks like." The sincerity in his voice surprised Ethan. He glanced at his father, who gave him a subtle nod of encouragement. The room seemed to hold its breath as Ethan made his decision. "I can't say that I forgive you right now," Ethan said, his voice raw. "But I see that you're trying, and that means something. Maybe one day we'll get there." Brandon and Tyler left the cafe that night with a newfound sense of responsibility. Their path to redemption would not be quick or easy, but it was a path they were committed to following. The community, having heard of the boys' public humiliation and the apology they had offered, watched with cautious eyes. Some were skeptical, others hopeful that true change was possible. Over the next few weeks, Brandon and Tyler continued their volunteer work, now with a deeper sense of purpose. They joined local initiatives to help underprivileged children, using their resources to support educational programs and community outreach. The contrast between who they had been and who they were becoming was stark, and people began to notice. Ethan watched from a distance, guarded but willing to acknowledge their efforts. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a start, and that start was enough for now. One day, as Ethan was walking home from school, he passed by a park where Brandon and Tyler were organizing a reading event for children. For the first time, he saw them not as bullies, but as young men trying to make a difference. It was a moment that hinted at the possibility of healing. With time, the story of Ethan's speech and Robert's unwavering presence during the graduation became a symbol of resilience and hope for the community. Robert's Café thrived, becoming a gathering place for neighbors who came to share stories, laugh, and find comfort. The toys he crafted by hand now carried more than the marks of his effort. They carried a story of love and sacrifice. Ethan found himself drawn into the life of the cafe, helping after school and on weekends. The bond between him and his father grew stronger as they worked side by side, their shared experiences weaving into the fabric of their daily lives. Brandon and Tyler, on their own paths of redemption, became familiar faces at the cafe. They brought donations from their parents and used their own money to support Robert's business. It was their way of giving back, of trying to undo some of the damage they had caused. One evening, as the sun set over the city and the cafe hummed with the quiet murmur of patrons, Brandon approached Robert with an envelope. "This is from us," he said, his voice hesitant but hopeful. "We want to help expand your cafe, make it more than just a business, a place where everyone feels welcome." Robert unfolded the envelope, his eyes scanning the check inside. It was enough to make a significant change, to turn his modest cafe into a true community hub. The gesture left him speechless, a mix of gratitude and disbelief washing over him. "This is generous," Robert said, looking up at Brandon and Tyler. The cafe fell silent as patrons turned to see the exchange, curious and moved by the sight of reconciliation. "It's the least we could do," Tyler said, sincerity evident in his tone. "We've taken enough from you. It's time we gave something back." Ethan watched the scene unfold, a strange warmth spreading in his chest. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was close. It was the first step toward something new, something better. With the donation, Robert and Ethan worked to expand the cafe, turning it into a space where people from all walks of life could gather. They added a small library, a play area for children, and a section where Robert displayed his wooden toys, now in greater demand than ever. The cafe's grand reopening brought the community together in a way they hadn't experienced before. Brandon and Tyler stood quietly in a corner, watching as people laughed and shared stories, their eyes finding Ethan's. He nodded at them, a silent acknowledgement of their efforts and the first hint of true forgiveness. Brandon and Tyler continued to work within the community, finding fulfillment in helping others. The lessons they had learned through their punishment turned into passions they pursued with genuine intent. They spoke at schools about the consequences of their actions, encouraging students to be kinder and more aware of those around them. Ethan, now preparing for college, found himself reflecting on the past year. He saw how far they had all come, from the boy who stood silent in the hallways to the young man who spoke for his father, from the bullies who once mocked to the men who now sought redemption. As he packed up for college, Ethan found the crumpled notes of the original graduation speech. He read it once, then set it down, realizing he had lived every word he once intended to say. On the day Ethan left for college, the cafe was filled with friends and neighbors wishing him well. Robert stood by the door, pride shining in his eyes. Brandon and Tyler arrived late, holding a small gift for Ethan, a handcrafted pen engraved with the words "Strength and Resilience." Ethan accepted it, a small smile breaking across his face. "Thank you," he said, and in that moment, the past truly began to let go of its hold on them. The story ended not with perfect resolution, but with the promise of continued growth. The cafe, now a symbol of resilience and community, stood as a testament to what they had all learned, that strength lies in love, forgiveness, and the willingness to change. The legacy of Robert and Ethan, and even Brandon and Tyler's transformation, became a story told around Chicago, a reminder that no matter where you start, it's the choices you make that define who you are. The cafe's reopening was a significant event, attracting people from different parts of Chicago who had heard about its transformation and the story behind it. The small, cozy space was now vibrant and welcoming, complete with bookshelves filled with donated books, walls adorned with photos of the community, and a corner where Robert's handmade toys were displayed like precious artifacts. Robert stood behind the counter, his hands steady as he brewed coffee and greeted familiar faces. He watched as children laughed and played, and parents chatted over warm cups of tea. It was a sight that filled him with peace, a reward for years of struggle and perseverance. Ethan, who had returned for the weekend from college, was sitting at a table, surrounded by friends and even a few classmates who once overlooked him. The atmosphere was light, laughter ringing through the room. Brandon and Tyler were among the crowd, their presence no longer awkward or strained. They had found their place, not as outsiders seeking redemption, but as part of the community that had embraced change. "I didn't think this place could look so alive," Brandon said quietly, standing next to Tyler as they watched the scene unfold. Tyler nodded, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. They had helped in small but meaningful ways, their acts no longer fueled by guilt, but by genuine care. A young girl approached Brandon, holding a carved wooden horse that Robert had made. "This is my favorite," she said, eyes wide with joy. Brandon felt a pang of emotion. What had started as a journey of atonement had become something more, something that made him feel whole. College life brought new challenges and opportunities for Ethan. He was no longer the boy who felt out of place. He had grown into a confident young man, shaped by the lessons of resilience and love taught by his father. The stories of his past were no longer burdens but sources of strength. He often shared them in essays, classroom discussions, and late-night conversations with friends. One evening, as Ethan walked back to his dorm after a long day of classes, he received a message from Robert. "I'm proud of you, son. The cafe is busy tonight. Miss having you here." Ethan smiled, warmth blooming in his chest. The bond with his father was a constant, even miles away. He thought about the cafe and the people who frequented it. He thought about Brandon and Tyler, who had continued their work in the community, and about how his voice that day at graduation had changed not just his life, but the lives of so many others. Ethan looked up at the night sky, stars scattered across the dark canvas. He knew his journey was just beginning, but it was one he would face with the unwavering strength he had inherited from his father. Brandon and Tyler's time spent volunteering had evolved from a requirement into a passion. They became involved in local youth mentorship programs, sharing their own story of arrogance, downfall, and growth. It wasn't easy at first. Facing the skepticism of others was part of their journey, but over time, people began to see that their transformation was real. One evening, they were invited to speak at a community event held at Robert's Café. The room was packed, and the atmosphere was buzzing with energy. Brandon stepped up to the makeshift stage, clearing his throat nervously. "Most of you know us as the boys who made some big mistakes," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We were wrong, and we hurt people who didn't deserve it. But what we learned is that change is possible and redemption isn't given, it's earned." Tyler stepped up beside him, nodding. "We're here not just to ask for forgiveness, but to show that we've learned how to be better. And we hope that by sharing our story, someone else might choose to act differently when faced with the same choices." The crowd was silent for a moment before applause filled the room. Robert and Ethan, standing in the back, exchanged a glance of quiet approval. Brandon and Tyler stepped down from the stage, feeling lighter. They were no longer just trying to make amends. They were part of something bigger, a ripple of change that started with a single act of courage and honesty. The cafe became more than just a place for coffee and conversation. It became a symbol of resilience, growth, and unity. People from all walks of life came to share their stories, support one another, and celebrate milestones. Robert often sat by the counter, watching it all unfold with a heart full of gratitude. One day, an elderly man who had been coming to the cafe for months approached Robert. "You've built something special here," he said, placing a hand on Robert's shoulder. "It's not just a cafe, it's a place where people come to heal." Robert's eyes misted with emotion. "Thank you," he replied, his voice soft. The journey had been long, filled with struggles and moments of doubt, but he wouldn't have changed it for anything. Ethan returned home one weekend to find a plaque mounted on the wall of the cafe. It read, "A place built on love, sacrifice, and the power of change." The words struck a chord deep within him, reminding him of the day he stood up on that stage and spoke not just for himself, but for his father and every silent struggle they had endured. Years later, Ethan graduated from college and returned to Chicago, ready to give back to the community that had shaped him. The cafe had grown, but its heart remained the same. Robert had stepped back from the daily work, letting Ethan take on more responsibilities. Brandon and Tyler, now working in community outreach, visited regularly. They had become respected members of the neighborhood, their past mistakes transformed into lessons they shared openly. One evening, Ethan organized an event at the cafe to celebrate the journey they had all taken. He stood on the same stage where Brandon and Tyler had once shared their story and looked out at the crowd, friends, family, and new faces, all connected by the threads of resilience and change. "My father taught me that true strength lies not in avoiding pain, but in facing it head-on and growing from it," Ethan said, his voice steady. "This place, this community, is proof that no matter how difficult things may get, there is always hope. We are all capable of change, and we all deserve a chance to be better." The applause that followed was thunderous, filled with the echoes of laughter, joy, and triumph. Robert, seated near the front, looked at his son with pride, knowing that the sacrifices of the past had led to this moment. They had built something lasting, something that would inspire generations to come. And in that moment, surrounded by those who had become family, Ethan knew that their story was more than just a tale of hardship and redemption. It was a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the belief that change was always possible, no matter where you started. The cafe was alive with the hum of conversation, the clinking of cups, and the warm, inviting glow of hanging lights. It had become more than just a place to grab a cup of coffee. It was now the beating heart of the neighborhood. Ethan had taken on more responsibility, implementing programs that served the community. Free tutoring sessions for students, career workshops, and storytelling nights were now regular events. Robert watched with pride as Ethan led a group of students through a workshop on essay writing. His son had grown into a confident young man, one who took what they had endured and turned it into something positive for others. Robert felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known was possible, a feeling that told him every sacrifice he'd made had been worth it. Brandon and Tyler stood at the back of the cafe, watching the scene unfold. They had both started their own youth mentorship programs, drawing on their past mistakes to help guide young people away from similar paths. Tyler leaned over to Brandon and whispered, "Do you think we ever imagined we'd be here in this place, doing this?" Brandon smiled, a shadow of the old arrogance gone from his eyes. "No, but it feels right, doesn't it?" Tyler nodded. It did feel right. They were no longer defined by their past mistakes, but by the changes they had chosen to make. And being part of the cafe's story, a place that symbolized resilience and the power of second chances, felt like the culmination of their journey toward redemption. Robert stood up from his usual spot behind the counter and walked over to join Ethan. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder and said, "I think it's time we talked about what's next." The conversation between Robert and Ethan was long and filled with excitement. They sat at one of the cafe's small wooden tables, surrounded by the soft chatter of patrons. Robert leaned forward, his eyes alight with pride and hope. "What do you mean by what's next?" Ethan asked, a smile playing at his lips. "I mean expanding this," Robert said, gesturing around the cafe. "Not just here, but to other neighborhoods, places that need a community center, a place of hope." Ethan's eyes widened. He hadn't thought beyond the cafe as it was, but the idea of spreading its impact was thrilling. "We could call it the Cornerstone Café, a place that stands as the foundation for anyone looking to rebuild." Robert nodded, emotion welling in his chest. "I like that. And you'll be at the helm, guiding it forward." Ethan reached across the table and squeezed his father's hand. "Only because you showed me how, Dad." Brandon and Tyler, overhearing the conversation, exchanged looks. Tyler stepped forward, clearing his throat. "If you're thinking of expanding, count us in. We'd love to help." Word of the expansion plan spread quickly. The cafe was already beloved by the neighborhood, and the idea that it could bring its warmth and support to other areas ignited a wave of excitement. Donations poured in from unexpected places: local businesses, community leaders, and even anonymous benefactors who had been touched by the cafe's story. Ethan worked tirelessly with Robert, Brandon, and Tyler to organize fundraising events. The once rivals turned allies poured their energy into creating something bigger than themselves. The first event was a community fair, complete with food stalls, games for children, and performances by local artists. The cafe was the center of it all, decorated with photos of Robert's early days selling toys on the street and the transformative journey that followed. As the sun set on the day of the fair, Ethan took the stage to address the crowd. "This cafe started as a dream between a father and son," he said, his voice strong. "And now it's growing into something that belongs to all of us. Thank you for being a part of this story." The crowd erupted into cheers, the glow of lanterns casting a warm light over their smiling faces. Robert watched from the sidelines, tears glistening in his eyes. Months of hard work and dedication led to the opening of the second cafe location, situated in a neighborhood that had once struggled with disconnection and a lack of community resources. The new location was more than just a coffee shop. It was a space for art, learning, and support. The walls were adorned with photos from the original cafe, linking the two places in a shared legacy of resilience. Brandon and Tyler played an instrumental role, leading mentorship programs and collaborating with local organizations to provide workshops on leadership and empathy. The community's reception was overwhelming, and soon the second cafe was as lively as the first, filled with people who felt seen and valued. Ethan walked into the new cafe one evening to find a young boy sitting with a book and a cup of cocoa. The boy looked up and smiled, his eyes wide with admiration. "I want to be like you one day," he said. Ethan knelt down, his voice kind. "You already are, kid." Years passed, and the network of Cornerstone Cafés grew, each one telling the story of resilience, forgiveness, and transformation. Ethan, now a respected community leader, continued to carry forward his father's legacy, speaking at schools and events about the power of hope and the importance of standing up for what's right. Brandon and Tyler's work also evolved. They became co-founders of a nonprofit focused on youth development and second chances, using their story as a testament to the fact that change was possible. Robert, now older and with a head full of gray hair, found peace in knowing that the seed he had planted had grown into a forest of hope. One evening, as the sun set and the streets were bathed in a warm, golden glow, Robert stood outside the original cafe. The laughter and life inside filled his heart. Ethan joined him, placing an arm around his father's shoulders. "Did you ever think it would become this?" Ethan asked, a smile spreading across his face. Robert's eyes glistened with tears. "I hoped, and look at what hope has done." The cafe doors swung open, and the hum of voices, laughter, and the clinking of cups spilled out into the street. It was more than a cafe now. It was a testament to resilience, love, and the power of redemption. The legacy of Robert and Ethan, forged in hardship and strengthened by love, continued to grow, carried forward by every person who walked through those doors with a heart open to change. The journey had been long, filled with unexpected turns and profound lessons. But in the end, it was a journey that proved one thing above all, that even in the hardest times, love and hope could build something unbreakable. As the Cornerstone Cafés expanded across Chicago, new challenges emerged. Ethan found himself juggling college classes and the management of the cafe network, which now included a growing staff and numerous programs. The demands were high, and although he thrived under pressure, there were days when the weight of it all made him question if he was pushing too far, too fast. Robert, now in his 60s but as determined as ever, noticed the strain in Ethan's voice during their nightly phone calls. One evening, he closed up the original cafe early and visited Ethan's apartment, a modest space filled with books, notebooks, and plans scattered across the coffee table. "Dad, you didn't have to come over," Ethan said, surprised but grateful. Robert placed a paper bag of fresh pastries on the table and took a seat across from him. "I know you, son. You're doing a lot, maybe too much." Ethan rubbed his eyes and let out a deep sigh. "It's just, I want everything to work. I want each cafe to be as special as this one, to help as many people as we can." Robert nodded, the deep lines on his face softening with empathy. "We've built something great, but don't forget, it started with just us, one step at a time, remember?" The advice, simple as it was, resonated with Ethan. He leaned back and smiled. "Thanks, Dad. I needed that." As they talked, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from Brandon. It was a photo of a packed community room at one of the new locations, filled with kids learning woodworking, a program inspired by Robert's own work. The success of the Cornerstone Cafés began to attract attention from local media. An article published in the Chicago Chronicle highlighted the story of how a single father's determination and his son's courage had sparked a movement. The piece was overwhelmingly positive, but it brought a spotlight that not everyone welcomed. Brandon and Tyler, now involved in community outreach and public speaking, faced new scrutiny. People who had known them before their change reached out, some with support but others with lingering doubts. Old classmates resurfaced with stories, some exaggerated, casting shadows on their pasts. Brandon felt the weight of this renewed attention. He called Ethan late one night, the strain evident in his voice. "What if people don't believe we've really changed? What if they think this is all an act?" Ethan was silent for a moment, then said, "They can only judge what they see, Brandon. So we keep showing them who we are now, not who we were. We don't get to change the past, but we can keep proving we're different today." As Brandon hung up the phone, he glanced at the schedule for his next community event. It wasn't just about redemption anymore. It was about taking every opportunity to show that change was real, even if it had to be proven again and again. The attention brought unexpected benefits as well. A local philanthropist named Helen Marlowe, known for her investments in community projects, visited the original cafe one morning. With her neatly tailored suit and kind eyes, she introduced herself to Robert and Ethan with a genuine interest in their story. "I've heard a lot about what you're doing here," she said, sipping the cafe's signature caramel latte. "I think there's potential to reach even more communities, especially those that don't have safe spaces for young people." Ethan's eyes lit up with possibility. "We've talked about that, expanding beyond just our current locations to places that need it most." Helen smiled. "Let's make that happen. I'd like to offer funding and resources to open more cafes, especially in neighborhoods that need them most. But I want it to stay true to what you've built here, a place built on resilience and kindness." The partnership with Helen Marlowe was transformative. With her support, the expansion plans accelerated, but this time, Ethan took Robert's advice to heart. He ensured that each new cafe retained the spirit of the original, focusing on personal connections, mentorship programs, and spaces where everyone felt welcome. As they shook hands, Robert looked on with pride, seeing how far Ethan had come, not just as his son, but as a leader who could inspire and connect with others in ways that even he hadn't imagined. With growth came challenges that no one anticipated. One evening, as Robert closed up the cafe, he noticed a man standing outside, staring through the window. The figure was gaunt, his clothes worn, but his eyes were sharp and familiar. Robert's heart sank when he recognized him, an old acquaintance from years ago when life was at its most difficult. "Jacob?" Robert said, opening the door cautiously. The man nodded, stepping into the warm glow of the cafe. The sight of him brought back memories Robert had buried, days when he'd struggled to put food on the table, when desperation had nearly consumed him. "I heard about this place," Jacob said, his voice rough. "Looks like you've done well for yourself, Robert." Robert swallowed hard. "It took time. And help." Jacob's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Think there's any room for an old friend to start over?" Robert didn't answer immediately. He thought of Ethan, of the journey that had brought them here, and of the cafe's mission to be a place for second chances. Robert nodded slowly. "We're always open to helping someone willing to put in the work." Jacob's lips twitched into a small, hopeful smile as he stepped further inside, the warmth of the cafe enveloping him. Jacob's presence at the cafe brought both tension and opportunity. He wasn't the only new face looking for a chance. With the cafe's reputation as a safe space for change, others began coming forward, each with their own story of struggle and hope. Ethan took it upon himself to create a program called New Roots, aimed at helping those seeking a fresh start. Jacob proved himself capable, working long shifts and connecting with patrons in ways Robert hadn't expected. But there were moments when old habits surfaced, and Robert found himself watching closely, waiting to see if trust could truly be rebuilt. One afternoon, as Jacob cleaned tables, he paused to watch Brandon and Tyler lead a mentorship session with a group of teenagers. His gaze lingered, admiration mixed with a touch of envy. "It's strange, isn't it?" Robert said, approaching him. "Seeing people change and knowing it's possible, even if you're not sure you can do it yourself." Jacob met Robert's eyes and nodded. "I'm trying, Robert. I really am." Robert placed a reassuring hand on Jacob's shoulder. "I know. Just keep showing up. That's where it starts." As the cafe continued to grow, so did the challenges that came with it. One evening, a register came up short. It was a small amount, but enough to raise concerns. Jacob's face fell when he saw Robert's expression, a mixture of disappointment and suspicion. "I didn't take it," Jacob said quietly, hands clenched at his sides. The room was silent, the weight of old suspicions pressing down on them both. Ethan stepped forward, eyes locked on Jacob. "We believe in second chances, but trust is earned. Let's figure this out together." Jacob's shoulders relaxed as Ethan's words registered. The journey to redemption wasn't over, it was just getting started. The tension in the cafe was palpable as Ethan and Robert reviewed the register logs and spoke to staff members. Brandon and Tyler, now mentors at the cafe and advocates for transparency, offered to help look into the situation. It wasn't just about the missing money, it was about maintaining the trust and integrity the cafe had come to symbolize. Jacob sat in a corner, hands folded and eyes downcast. The looks from other staff members burned into him, each one a reminder of the reputation he hadn't yet fully shaken off. His mind raced with thoughts of whether he should walk away now or stay and prove himself. "I've checked the logs," Brandon said, approaching Robert and Ethan with a clipboard. "The shortage happened during the busiest part of the evening. It could have been a mistake, or—" He glanced over at Jacob, who flinched under the scrutiny. Before the conversation could continue, one of the teenage volunteers spoke up from the other side of the room. "It was me." The room fell silent as all eyes turned toward him. He was young, no older than 15, with a nervous energy that suggested he hadn't planned on admitting anything. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to take some home for my little sister. We didn't have enough for dinner," the boy stammered, eyes welling up with tears. Jacob's face shifted from fear to surprise, and then understanding. He stepped forward, breaking the silence. "If you needed help, you could have asked," Jacob said, his voice firm but kind. "This place is for people like you, not against you." The boy nodded, his head hanging low. Ethan approached and placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "We're here to help, not judge, but next time, come to us, okay? We'll find a way together." The boy nodded, relief breaking through his tears as the cafe's patrons let out a collective sigh. The incident, small but meaningful, served as a reminder that trust wasn't just something to be earned, it was something to be shared. In the wake of the incident, Jacob's reputation shifted subtly but unmistakably. He hadn't been the culprit, and his handling of the situation had shown Robert and Ethan that he was capable of empathy and leadership. The other staff members began to warm to him, their initial wariness fading as they saw him work tirelessly to contribute. Robert watched as Jacob offered the teenage volunteer some pointers on handling the till, a kind smile breaking across his usually stoic face. For the first time in years, Robert felt that old friendship rekindle, not the one defined by shared hardship, but by mutual respect. "You did well today," Robert said as he passed by Jacob. Jacob paused, looking at Robert with gratitude and surprise. The words might have been simple, but they carried the weight of all the unspoken forgiveness between them. "Thanks, Robert. Means a lot coming from you," Jacob replied, a touch of emotion cracking through his voice. As the evening rush filled the cafe, Jacob caught a glimpse of himself in the reflection of the glass door. For the first time, he saw someone worth respecting staring back. The success of the New Roots program led to an influx of people seeking mentorship and guidance. Each day brought new faces, each with their own story of struggle and hope. Ethan's college friends even started coming by to volunteer, adding their skills to tutoring programs and workshops. One of these volunteers was Maggie, an architecture student who saw potential in the cafe's layout. "You could use this space more efficiently," she told Ethan one evening, sketching out a redesign on a napkin. "Add more tables here, create a corner with beanbags for the reading program." Ethan's eyes lit up as he saw her vision come to life on paper. "I love it," he said. "Let's do it." Robert chuckled from behind the counter. "Looks like we'll need to get the community involved for another renovation," he said, already imagining how the changes would benefit the place they had built together. Maggie's redesign plans spread through the community like wildfire, inspiring volunteers to show up with paint cans, carpentry tools, and ideas of their own. The cafe's next phase was taking shape, and it was more ambitious than any of them could have imagined. With the renovations underway, not everything went smoothly. A shipment of supplies arrived late, and an unexpected plumbing issue delayed progress by weeks. Ethan felt the stress piling up, his usual calm exterior starting to crack. Brandon, noticing the strain, stepped in to help. "Hey, we've been through worse," Brandon said, handing Ethan a cold soda and sitting beside him on a pile of lumber. Remember when we thought no one would ever forgive us? We made it through that. We'll make it through this too." Ethan chuckled, the tension easing from his shoulders. "You're right. Just feels like there's always something." Brandon's expression grew serious. "There will always be something, but we're not facing it alone. That's the difference." The sound of hammers and laughter filled the air as Robert and Maggie led a group of volunteers through painting and carpentry. Even Jacob was at the forefront, encouraging the young volunteer from the incident to help him build new shelves. The cafe was more than just a place now, it was a beacon of unity. The cafe's renovation was complete, and the day of the grand reopening arrived with clear skies and a festive atmosphere. Banners hung from the awning, children ran around with painted faces, and live music filled the street outside. It was a celebration that felt like a culmination of all their hard work and shared trials. Robert stood at the entrance, greeting guests with a smile that seemed to glow. Ethan took the stage to say a few words, the crowd's energy buzzing with anticipation. "This cafe started as a simple dream between my father and me," Ethan said, his voice steady and full of pride. "But it has grown because of all of you, because we chose to come together, to believe in second chances, and to build something greater than ourselves." A wave of applause rippled through the crowd. Brandon, Tyler, and Jacob stood near the front, their faces reflecting the journey that had brought them here. Ethan stepped off the stage, and Robert pulled him into a tight hug. "Your mom would be proud," Robert whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek as he whispered back, "I hope so, Dad. I really do." As the evening settled into a comfortable lull, the cafe was filled with laughter and conversation. Maggie, now an integral part of the team, sat with Ethan discussing future plans. Brandon and Tyler were deep in conversation with a group of young volunteers, sharing their story once more to inspire hope and change. Robert sat at the counter, a cup of coffee warming his hands as he watched it all unfold. Jacob approached and took a seat beside him, both men sitting in silence for a moment. "We've come a long way," Jacob said finally, his voice low and reflective. "We have," Robert agreed, "and I have a feeling we're just getting started." The door opened and a young woman stepped in, holding a worn-out notebook and a hopeful smile. She looked around the cafe with eyes that spoke of searching for something she had yet to find. Ethan noticed her and stood, ready to welcome the next chapter of their story, because at Cornerstone Café, every story had a place, and every person had a chance to start anew. The next few months at Cornerstone Café were filled with a steady growth and new beginnings. The young woman who had walked in with the notebook, Emily, quickly became a part of the cafe's fabric. She was an aspiring writer looking for a place where she could belong. Ethan offered her a spot to run a weekly creative writing workshop, drawing people of all ages who wanted to share their stories and find inspiration. Robert watched as Emily's workshops brought in a new wave of life and energy to the cafe. The stories shared in the corner reading nook ranged from tales of struggle to triumph, each one adding to the rich tapestry of the community that had formed around them. Brandon and Tyler continued their work, hosting mentorship sessions and connecting with schools to share their journey of growth and redemption. Their nonprofit, Second Chances Chicago, had grown and started collaborating with Cornerstone Café to bring mentorship and support to other parts of the city. One evening, Ethan found himself alone in the cafe after hours, surrounded by the soft glow of string lights and the hum of the city outside. He sat at a table with his old graduation speech in front of him, reading it with a smile. It was a reminder of how far they had come since that day, how a speech of pain and revelation had sparked change not only in their lives, but in so many others. Robert entered, noticing the speech in Ethan's hands. He walked over, a knowing smile on his face. "Looking back?" Ethan nodded. "It's funny, isn't it? How one moment can change everything." Robert sat beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "It's not just one moment, son. It's every moment that came after. Every decision we made, every time we chose to keep going when things were hard." Ethan looked up at his father, gratitude welling in his chest. "We did this together, and I couldn't be prouder." A year later, Cornerstone Café was ready to open its fifth location, this time in a neighborhood that had once been neglected but now buzzed with hope. The grand opening was planned as a community-wide event, featuring local artists, music, and stories shared by people who had been touched by the cafe's mission. Ethan stood in front of the crowd, his heart full. Cornerstone Café started with a simple idea: to create a place where everyone feels seen and valued. Today, it's not just a cafe, it's a movement. One that proves kindness, resilience, and forgiveness are the cornerstones of every strong community. Brandon, Tyler, and Jacob stood together, listening with expressions that spoke of their shared pride. Maggie, now working as the cafe's lead architect and coordinator, looked on with a smile, knowing that this was just the beginning of what they could build together. The celebration marked not just an expansion, but the acknowledgement of everything that Cornerstone Café had become, a symbol of second chances, resilience, and hope. Ethan, Robert, Brandon, and Tyler knew that the cafe's story would continue to grow, intertwined with the stories of the people who walked through its doors. As the sun set and the city lights blinked on, Robert found a moment to sit back and take it all in: the laughter of children playing, the sounds of new friendships being formed, and the sight of his son, Ethan, leading with confidence and compassion. "You did it, Dad," Ethan said, joining Robert at the table. Robert smiled, eyes misting. "No, Ethan. We did it, and this is just the beginning." Years passed, and Cornerstone Café became an integral part of the Chicago landscape. Its mission spread to new cities, inspiring others to create similar spaces where people could come together, share their stories, and find hope. Ethan continued to lead with the same passion that had driven him on that fateful graduation day, never forgetting the sacrifices and love that had brought them here. Brandon and Tyler's nonprofit grew into a renowned organization that provided mentorship and support across the state. Jacob, once a shadow of his past, became a respected cafe manager and mentor, a living testament to the power of second chances. Robert, now retired but a constant presence at the original cafe too, watched with pride as his son carried on their legacy. The cafe's walls were filled with photos of the community, framed newspaper articles, and stories that told of resilience, love, and the power of believing in each other. On a quiet evening, Robert stood at the entrance of the original cafe looking out over the street where it had all started. Ethan joined him, and together they watched as people came and went, their laughter and conversation a testament to the dream they had built. "Do you ever wonder if Mom sees this?" Ethan asked softly. Robert's eyes sparkled with unshed tears. "I know she does, Ethan, and she'd be just as proud as I am." As the cafe doors closed for the night, the legacy of Cornerstone Café shone brightly, a beacon of hope in the heart of Chicago and beyond. The story that began with sacrifice and a fight for dignity had grown into a movement, a reminder that no matter where you start, love, resilience, and kindness can create a future full of promise. The story of Cornerstone Café was passed down through generations, not just as a tale of hardship and triumph, but as a lesson that in every moment we have the choice to build, to forgive, and to rise above. It was a place that proved that true strength comes not just from what we endure, but from what we create together. And so, the doors of Cornerstone Café remained open, inviting anyone who needed a fresh start, a warm smile, or a place where their story could unfold, always welcomed, always seen, and always valued. The journey of Robert and Ethan, marked by sacrifice, resilience, and unwavering love, had transformed a simple cafe into the heart of a community. Cornerstone Café became more than a place. It was a testament to the power of second chances and the strength found in unity. What began as an effort to honor a father's hard work and a son's determination had sparked a movement that transcended neighborhoods and inspired countless others to believe in change and redemption. Brandon, Tyler, and Jacob's stories of growth added layers of depth to this legacy, showing that transformation is possible when humility and empathy are embraced. The community they built together stood as proof that even the most painful beginnings could lead to something beautiful and lasting. As Robert and Ethan watched new generations walk through the doors they once struggled to keep open, they knew they had not just built a cafe, but a legacy of hope that would endure long after them. If this story of resilience, love, and transformation moved you, consider sharing it with someone who needs a reminder of the power of second chances. Let the tale of Cornerstone Café inspire you to be a beacon of hope in your own community. Whether it's through a simple act of kindness or reaching out to someone in need, remember that every small gesture can ripple out to create change. Join us in spreading the message of hope and resilience. Share your own stories of transformation, or how you've seen acts of kindness impact your life. Let's continue building a world where everyone feels seen, valued, and supported, just like the legacy of Robert, Ethan, and Cornerstone Café. Thank you for being part of this story.